Hi guys, Eric here. Just wanted to offer a video up to give some tips on how to use the protocols for NASM's Phase 1 of Stabilization Endurance Training to help improve some muscular imbalances, some real-world applications of it, as well as give some guidelines for an assignment for the Module 4 and 5 Fit 325 class for the spring of 2010. Last couple of videos I gave some props and some love to the Bruins for their postseason run, so I got to switch it around. We get the Boston Celtics in the postseason too, so we'll go with the wear and the green tonight for the Celtics. We'll representing from Beantown. All right, a few things that we'd like to see when using the Phase 1 protocols from the National Academy of Sports Medicine. When dealing with someone, you've performed an assessment, you've observed some compensations, they have some muscular imbalances, some movement impairments. We want to begin with self-myofascial release. This is going to reduce any adhesions that could be within the myofascial tissue. It can also reduce some overactivity that might be in some muscles. We know through sufficient enough research that when you subject repetitive movements, poor posture, emotional stress, blunt trauma, a host of other stimuli to certain muscles, some muscles will become inhibited and some will become overactive. So if you have tissues that are chronically overactive, the myofascial release or the foam rolling or the soft tissue work can help to inhibit those tissues and potentially break up some restrictions in the tissues. Once that's done, you can try using a technique like static stretching to restore length to any muscles or tissues that are considered to be shortened. We're not using static stretching prior to an activity in a muscle that's at a normal resting length or that's already lengthened out. We're only using static stretching to restore length to a muscle that's been shortened. One of the reasons why it might be recommended to start with static stretching versus active isolated, if someone is a true beginner or they're deconditioned, or think about this, if they have muscular imbalances causing a movement impairment or movement compensation, they probably don't have very good neuromuscular control or neuromuscular efficiency. So when you think about active isolated stretching, what you're doing is you're asking one specific muscle to activate so you can inhibit the antagonist, the opposite muscle. So if someone has overactive hip flexors and underactive glutes, if we're trying to squeeze the glute to inhibit the hip flexor, what you're most likely going to get for someone who has imbalances is you'll have synergistic dominance, muscles like the erector spinae, the adductor magnus, the hamstring complex, and especially the piriformis would be the muscles that would engage. So you're trying to reciprocally inhibit the hip flexor with muscles that are already synergistically dominant. This can feed into the altered movement pattern that they already have. So using self-myofascial release and then static stretching first, if someone's in a Phase 1 program and you have notable muscular imbalances that you've seen during a movement assessment. From there, moving on to core stabilization techniques. If we follow NASM's recommendations for core exercise and the stabilization level, there's going to be little to no movement in the spine. We're focusing on the deep intrinsic core stabilizers that provide intersegmental stabilization. We're not working on flexion and extension and rotation of the spine like with a crunch or a back extension, etc. We're working on the muscles that help to prevent those excessive movements. If someone's low back is arching, for example, and they can't control their spine, they can't control their pelvis, these deep intrinsic stabilizers don't have the strength or the endurance to hold in the position. So we're doing slow, steady movements of 4-2-1 tempo or a static hold during these exercises to develop the strength and endurance to maintain alignment of the lumbopelvic hip complex during loaded or repetitive exercises or even just everyday postures. This is going to be pretty important for preventing pain, reversing pain, and just teaching people how to fire in the proper movement sequence and movement patterns. With this, something to think about when you're putting together a program. If you look in the text, that might just say that you should move slow or to 4-2-1 or 3-2-1 tempo. You might take an exercise like a prone iso abs, aka a plank or a hover if you're a body pumper. But a 4-2-1 tempo, I find, doesn't fit all that well for the iso abs unless someone's really already got it down. You might have to get them to a 6 or a 10-second repetition where they kind of get into place, they find their alignment, they engage the stabilizer, they get that, then they get some fatigue, and then they lower down slowly. So this is something where it might be a static hold for 6, 10, 20, 30, 45 seconds as opposed to maybe a 4-2-1 tempo for multiple reps. You can do it either way, but real-world application, in my humble experience, is that having a static hold is a little bit easier for someone who's a little bit deconditioned or has imbalances to try to learn. So when you're writing this on one of the assignments, you don't want to just throw down slow, and you might want to rethink the 3 or 4-2-1 tempo, and perhaps you'll do a static hold. Personally, I don't have anyone do a prone iso abs for more than 30 to 45 seconds. I mean, if they can do that relatively well, I'm going to challenge them. I'm going to use the neural continuum to make the exercise more difficult. I use a longer lever arm. I'll change the position that they're in. You know, someone doesn't need to be holding a position for a minute or more. They just get bored, and there's 1,000 other things that we can do to stimulate the nervous system. So that's core stability. From there, we want to enhance those benefits of the intersegmental stabilizers to limit movement of the spine, and then kind of take that same concept into balance training. So we're taking the thought of segmental stability and transferring that down to the hip, knee, and ankle. As we walk, we spend about 80% of our time on one foot. As we run, that goes over 93% of the time on one foot. So we have to be good at providing intersegmental stability at the hip, knee, and ankle. NASM's protocols recommend little to no movement at the hip, knee, or ankle in the stabilization level. So something like a single leg balance where you would hold statically, or a single leg balance reach where you would move the lower extremity to close one eye, movement of the upper extremity, play, toss, and catch, whatever it may be. We wouldn't recommend a lunge to balance or a single leg squat or necessarily Romanian deadlift here, because people don't usually have the strength and endurance of the segmental stabilizers to keep alignment of the hip, knee, and ankle, to keep the arch supported, to keep the knee in line over the second and third toe, and the glute and abdominal stability to keep the pelvis and lumbar spine where it should be, along with those deep intrinsic abdominal muscles like the transverse abdominis. So we wouldn't want a single leg squat here. We wouldn't want a lunge to balance here. We want to focus on little to no movement in the hip, knee, and ankle, along with little to no movement in the spine as we move through there. So when we're focusing on the first few steps of a program, we're looking at inhibiting overactive muscles with soft tissue work or myofascial release, maybe breaking up some adhesions in the myofascial tissue. We're looking at static stretching to restore length to shorten muscles during the flexibility component. We're then looking at addressing the inhibited core stabilizers through the core stabilization level exercise with little to no motion of the spine. And then we're trying to get into a little bit more of a functional position with a single leg balance exercise to still limit movement of the hip, knee, and ankle, so we can begin to keep the joints in alignment during more functional movement positions, whether it's through weight training or walking or just everyday life that we'd like to do. So those are some of the protocols that we'd like to see. I would like you to keep in mind using the tempo from the text. When it says slow, don't just write slow. Think about it. When you're programming for balance exercises, don't write slow for a single leg balance exercise. How do you do a single leg balance slowly? It's a static exercise. We're holding for 6, 10, 12, 30 seconds, whatever it may be. Or if you're doing a single leg balance with reach, you're doing 10 reps with each leg. So there's what the text says, but then that's applying it in the real world. So I'd like you to be able to take the rationale for using these exercises and then writing the protocol so it makes a little bit more sense. And I am asking for specifics in the Mod 4 and Mod 5 assignments. And this will come in later through some of the other courses that you have. Instead of saying ranges, be specific, nail it down. Let me see, I've got a few other notes through here. Those are the biggies. Up about 8 minutes or so for the video. I'll take a moment to sort of close up, and then I'll get off for 10 minutes so I can get this up on YouTube for everyone to watch. The importance of focusing on little to no movement of the spine in the core exercises, as many people do not have the strength or the endurance of the stabilizers to maintain alignment of the lumbar spine, like I mentioned. What that does, it shifts load disproportionately to ligaments and discs and cartilage. And we don't want to wear down that tissue. We want to use those tissues to transmit force when is appropriate. But if we don't have alignment of the bony structures, if the muscles aren't holding the bones in the right place, when that force goes to get transmitted through the spine, through the pelvis, the ligaments and the discs and the cartilage, the non-contractile tissue, the passive system takes the weight and the load of it. And after a while, we start to develop tendinitis, bursitis, aggravation to these soft tissues with inflammation and pain, and eventually inhibition, and then there's going to be a significant trauma down the line if we don't kind of stop that. So it's not just that session, but it's weeks, days, months, years down the line if we let someone perform a faulty movement pattern. So keep it clean, form matters, it always counts. Thanks for watching. I'm Eric Beard. Have a great day. Go Celts.